again, everybody. You've had a nice lunch. Everybody's ready for activity. By the way, this is going to be an interactive one, so we hopefully have a roving mic in the audience to involve some of you. So as you just heard, we're going to be talking to you about legacy, and you heard this morning from several of our speakers that we have a Minister of Happiness here in Dubai. We have all sorts of wonderful positions, and I think that was one of the most amazing ones. But Marjan, who I'm about to introduce you, even has legacy, as you can see, in her business title. So Marjan Faraidooni is Vice President, Legacy, Impact and Development. What an amazing job title, Expo 2020. And she has a lot of experience in these kind of roles, but she's going to explain to us in a bit what her mission and what her brief was from the government in this position. But largely speaking, it's to ensure that she delivers, or the team, the event, delivers a positive, sustainable and enduring impact beyond 2020, 2021 onwards. So the legacy aims to manifest itself through investments in infrastructure, redevelopment of the site, promotion of culture, history, traditions, all around the theme of Dubai, connecting minds, creating the future, and some various sub-themes like opportunity, mobility, and sustainability. This is quite a tough brief she's given. So she joined Expo 2020 in March 2014 and has been leading the strategy development and execution of the legacy program ever since. But this is not new to Marjan, the Expo 2020 opportunity, because she's been working in multiple industries, helping the Dubai government with their legacy and with the related innovations, etc., in healthcare, real estate, hospitality, leisure, and entertainment. So this young lady really knows what she's talking about.
I hope so.
and has a very, very interesting view on the world. Now, we're going to contrast, so Expo 2020 here in Dubai, with legacy himself within the meetings industry. You can tell by the grey hair. So Martin's been around this industry for a very long time, and we've known each other, so I can be cheeky to him. So as CEO of the International Congress and Convention Association, one of our leading industry associations, Martin can talk to us not only about legacy from the ICCA point of view and events that ICCA organises, but all of the member associations, cities, and suppliers that work within the meetings industry. And Martin has been CEO of ICCA since 2002, but prior to being with ICCA, was in various destinations and marketing-related, meetings-related sales and marketing positions, and did actually work for the British Tourism Authority for a while, which was known as Visit Britain. Very multinational, has worked in multiple cities, Hong Kong, the USA, UK, currently based out of Amsterdam, but I don't know how much you see your office because I know you're on the road all the time. So Martin will be able to share extensive experience both looking at how the industry's changed and what we're trying to achieve in the future with regards to legacy. So great, welcome to you both, happy to be here. And as I said, Greg, unfortunately, our third speaker can't make it. He's travelled all the way from Africa, US via Africa to get here, currently sitting in his hotel room, nursing a fever and absolutely no voice. So, in his honour, I would like you, the associations in the room, to be his voice. So for any association here, I'm going to ask you also to share with us any of your experience in creating legacy as we go through this session. So please be prepared when I spring on you. If you've got some good stories, challenges or excitements or things you've actually achieved with creating legacy through your events, I'd love to hear about it. So, Marjan, let's start with you. Legacy. Yes. You've been given this fantastic brief. You've been given a lot of responsibility, big goals to achieve. Tell us a little bit about, what was the brief when you were given this? How are you going to create your legacy, and what does it mean?
Okay. The brief was rather simple from our leadership. It was very clear when I joined the team that we had to focus on two aspects in planning, and one of which was very clear is that we needed to deliver on an exceptional event. There's no question, it has to wow the world. Equally important to our leadership, and the message was up until today, and we'll continue having this message, is that we need to ensure whatever it is that we do that every member of the Expo team thinks of their job to ensure that we leave behind a meaningful legacy. And legacy is positive impacts. And the way that we define it in our organization, the framework that we have, is we look at it along 4 dimensions. And we recognize that legacy goes beyond the physical. I mean, one of the few questions, or the first questions I get from people is what's going to happen with the site after the Expo, of which we have a plan for. But it also includes the economic impact, the social impact, and very important for the United Arab Emirates and the Miasa region is the reputational impact that this Expo will have in terms of delivering this event. So it was very clear to our leadership, and what we do in our work every day is we plan alongst these dimensions. And I'm very proud to say that every member of the Expo team always thinks about what type of impact am I leaving in the work that I'm doing.
Right. So impact, of course, that's crucial when thinking about legacy. And Martin, when we were talking before, that was the word you immediately used when you were referring to what we're trying to achieve through our association meetings and things. So tell me a little bit about how you're currently defining and encouraging the industry to think about legacy around events and impact.
Okay, I want to talk not about ICCA and what we do in our own association, in our own meeting, but really about how the whole industry, the meetings industry, has changed its understanding of what our role is and what we're trying to achieve, and also to understand what is natural to the associations in the room, which is that their meetings take place in order to serve a mission and to leave a legacy both for the local people they're meeting up with and for their whole global community or their regional community. And this is a shift I describe as from a tourism mentality to a beyond tourism mentality, where destinations are focusing on economic development issues and on intellectual capital issues and on competitiveness and how their cities, their countries can attract young, vibrant people to move and live there, venture capital to come in, create business opportunities for their own organizations, and also increasingly to serve the ordinary citizens in the cities where the meetings take place. So given that this shift has happened in a very large number of them, especially the leading destinations, there's kind of a mismatch at the moment because the destinations have shifted, but the associations haven't yet realized this to a large extent, and so they are still engaging with the meetings industry in a very transactional way. So they're talking about logistics, movement, bed nights, because that's the way they've been primed to talk to the suppliers. In fact, many of the suppliers are now open to associations coming in and talking about their mission, what their delegates are trying to achieve, what their organization's trying to achieve, what they would like to leave behind. And so my basic theme is we need to actually change the mentality and elevate the conversation between the meetings industry and the association community.
Actually, that gives me a great opportunity to ask anybody in the room who represents an association, is that a fair description, what Martin was saying, that associations are still talking very much about the commodity, or what the meeting actually requires from a logistics point of view, or have you already moved on to impact? So I don't know if there's anybody out there that would like to volunteer to answer my question from an association point of view. Michelle, you were nodding. Can I volunteer you to say something? We do have a microphone.
We have a microphone?
Yeah.
Can we have me use last?
So PCMA has a very large meeting and rotates around the world, and I'm sure Michelle can share a little bit of insight with us.
Yeah, I think it's far beyond that. I think that associations now are already thinking in that mentality, but where the challenge is the conversation that's being had between the association and the destination. So destinations need to be curious about the organizations that are coming and what is driving them, what their objectives are, that kind of thing. The association will certainly share it, but they aren't asking the questions, I think, in many cases. But certainly legacy is a large component of all association meetings.
Okay, cool. So Marjan, let's go back to you. You mentioned it's all about beyond the physical. Mm-hmm. So you're creating a very large site and a very large event, and you're talking to countries all around the world. So give us some examples of how you're creating this legacy and the plan beyond the physical.
Okay. So I have many examples, and for starters, with World Expos, a lot of what it provides is a platform for participants from all around the world. And we're very proud to announce today that we've been able to confirm 150 countries that are going to be part of the Expo. 150 countries. 50. 50.
Wow.
Yes, we have a target of around 186, and we're very proud of this number.
Fantastic.
And for every participating country, you know, we have a role to ensure that their participation is of value. So we've introduced a lot of initiatives that introduces the countries and the participants to the community, for example, in the United Arab Emirates. We have what we call, for example, the Business Concierge Service. So we want to take their participation in Expo beyond their pavilions and the exhibitions that they would have, but also to look for opportunities that would allow them to take forward their economic aspirations by introducing them to both, you know, the business community in the UAE or within nations. So that's another example. And another example that we're working very hard at Expo is youth engagement. So we've put in a team that's called Youth Connect, and their responsibility is to actually go out to schools. You know, one thing about World Expos that we want to really bring back is the inspiration that it creates about the future. And of course, youth is at the cornerstone of that. So our program is to go into schools, to inspire them about Expo, but also to give them a voice and a platform that will you know, help shape their futures. And all the programs that we're working to develop at the Expo is based on our conversations that we're having with young people. And I'd like to highlight, when we say young people at Expo, we're talking about you know, students from the ages of 16 up until high school and university students. So it's not just focused on one particular segment of youth. And we're hoping with that we leave a social legacy really that you know, creates a pipeline of inspired youth that will want to take forth the future and take responsibility. So these are two examples that we're working on at Expo.
Great. And Martin, let me come back to that. So, you know, Marjan talked about the value, first of all, to the participants coming in to the Expo. And she talked about this sense of impact in the community and education, working with schools. What are you seeing both associations and destinations doing now to take their meetings beyond the physical of 3 or 4 days of a meeting and working with the community, giving back, involving schools? I think you have many examples that you've seen through the last few years.
Yeah, I mean, there's actually a new program that was launched this year by ICCA and Best Cities, one of the major consortiums in the meetings industry, called Incredible Impacts. And it called on international associations to put forward programs that demonstrated these incredible impacts that their organizations were having, whether it was on youth empowerment or spreading knowledge to developing countries or reaching out into local communities to make people aware of either social issues or environmental issues or problems. And there were 20 fantastic case studies, 10 shortlisted, 3 winners who were just announced in November. And these sort of examples included from World Parkinson's, outreach programs into the local cities where the meeting was taking place, lecturers giving talks in cafes about the reality of living with Parkinson's, opportunities for kids to put together video about what it's like for young people with Parkinson's, because it's seen as an old person's problem, but it's actually much more than that. And so they demonstrated that they're reaching out beyond the traditional way that a meeting takes place within 4 walls and just talks to the people who already know. So we're seeing more and more examples of this, and I think that every association knows that one of the reasons that it exists is because of the passion of the people who go to the meetings. And those people aren't just passionate about talking within their closed group, they want to actually advocate on behalf of their community to the rest of the world. And so I think we've all got natural audiences or natural faculties within our delegate groupings who are really happy to go out and spend an afternoon talking to a local university, going out and meeting school kids, doing those sort of discussions in cafes to normal people to talk about what's it like caring for people with dementia, or talking about the very latest science and how that's going to change their kids' lives. These sort of issues can be done on small scale, they can be captured on social media. A lot of the programs that won awards included very tremendous kind of 45 million impression type outreach programs on very, very complex issues. And we're seeing generally a whole shift from meetings that are purely about the science to meetings that are now about the community that is linked to that scientific research. And I can only see this heading in one direction.
So, yeah, meetings that have often been about the exchange of knowledge, research to advance healthcare and to advance medical treatment, to advance the science, as opposed to now taking the whole aspect of these meetings in healthcare out into the community. I know we have a number of associations, medical associations here. Is there anyone that could share an example of an education program that you've done, whether you're in healthcare or not, that you've done with your meetings, actually bringing in either schools was the example here, or working with universities, or working to educate the general public? David, I know you've got shopping malls. I'm sure you've done something. Do I have a volunteer over here? Fantastic, thank you. Yeah, and if you can introduce yourself.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I'm Dr. Yasser Farhat. I'm Secretary General of the Arab Association of Urology. Actually, 15 years we have the Arab Association and always running an event, annual conference. But a few years ago we have the concept of, or the legacy of helping people. So having the annual conference is, yes, it's to networking with others, especially with the international speakers, but we are looking always for providing education and training to the young urologists. So this is the main focus, or the main thing to be left after our event, to have establishing what's called now the Arab School of Urology, focusing about skills, not only knowledge, which improving skills of young urologists. And this helping people that it runs through the whole Arab countries, because many of young doctors cannot travel abroad to having the networking or to having improving their skills. So we are leaving some sort of training and the new technology coming to the field of urology to some countries that cannot be easily exposed to the new technology. So this is the point that we are focusing about: training, education to improve the skills, which will be reflected on the end user, which is our community and our patients.
Great. So also just the sheer fact that associations meetings are traveling around the world and going into very different parts of community or cities and bringing education, I think as associations we're leaving legacy wherever we go, just as part of our mission. But let's come back to you, Marjan, and the Expo. You were, the whole idea of leaving legacy and driving change for the future, creating something beyond the event, the sustainability. Can you give us some more examples of those kind of programs that you're putting in place, sort of post-Expo 2020?
The one that comes to mind is, when we planned for this Expo, or when the government decided to bid for this Expo, it was a natural extension of the country's vision. So we look at Expo as a journey. So to that point, I'll go back to the question I receive a lot from people, and that is, what's going to happen to the site after Expo? And all the investments in fantastic infrastructure, both from a building perspective, but also technology. We've launched the city after Expo, so the work does not stop when the party is over, as we say. We're going to go through a transition process of 6 to 9 months, where the current buildings and infrastructure will be retrofitted to welcome new businesses and new companies into the city. And the team today, you know, when we talk about planning for the future, we have a team in place today who are talking to future you know, businesses who will be part of the city. And we're very proud to say that we've been able to attract two of our premier sponsors, Siemens and Accenture, to set up their base in what we call District 2020 after Expo. So that's a very tangible example of what we've done in terms of planning, that, you know, we know there are certain types of communities that we want to continue to take the Expo message forward, and we're working on attracting them today. So that's one example. And another one I'd like to touch on is, in order to ensure that we have an exceptional Expo, we're looking to bring in 30,000 volunteers from the community. And that's one of the very high number, let's just put it that way. And in that process of bringing in volunteers, we're going to train a lot of people to be the faces of the Expo. They're going to welcome people across the city. But also we want to bring in volunteers who are able to talk about a lot of the offerings that we have on the Expo site. So for example, we have exhibitions on sustainability. So we want to have in volunteers who will be able to talk about that. And for us, that is going to be a fundamental cornerstone of social legacy, leaving behind a workforce or a volunteer force of 30,000 that everybody can benefit from in the future.
Excellent. Martin, in some of your award-winning programs that you were talking about, have you also seen this example of, you know, bringing in volunteers in large numbers from the host city and
actually,
destination?
one of the, I mean, we bring in volunteers into our own congress every year, and
yeah.
we involve people who are studying business, who are studying tourism, hospitality, and meetings specifically. And we always give them behind-the-scenes viewpoints of what's actually going on, so they don't just superficially see the surface. But the best project, the one that made the biggest legacy that I've come across, gets to the heart of what was talked about before when we had our inspiring 15-year-old with us, which is about giving responsibility.
Yeah.
So when we held our congress in Leipzig in Germany, the local center, transport company, catering company, various other companies involved with the Congress, picked all of their junior staff, all aged 22, 23, the interns, the real beginners, and they gave them one task. They said, you have to design a program to persuade 90% plus of the delegates to use public transport rather than taking taxis from the city centre on what would be a 6-7 minute taxi journey, or a 20-25 minute trip by public transport. And these kids divided themselves up into teams and analysed the whole thing. They changed the timetable of the trams so that they travelled at peak times when we needed to get delegates from city centre to downtown. They put green footprints from every HQ, every major official hotel to the nearest stop. They designed the videos so that the previous day's Congress program was being shown on there. They cut a deal with a local farmer so that the kids could be there with trays of apples to give away to the delegates. They all trained themselves on what were the coolest places in Leipzig so they could engage people very early in the morning in conversation. And they left everybody with a huge smile on their faces. Now, not only was this regarded as the highest rated element of the entire program, you know, forget about the business programs and the networking, the delegates rated this the highest of anything we've ever evaluated. The kids themselves were the focal point of the entire event's PR. You know, all of the newspapers in Germany wanted to talk to these kids. They didn't want to talk to us, thank God. But they did double-page spreads on why Leipzig was Germany's Congress capital on the basis of what these kids did. And they were then being invited to meetings all around the world to talk about Germany's sustainability, about the initiatives that were being taken, about youth empowerment. So a single project, well-designed, giving people responsibility, can be enormously powerful both for the event and for the destination.
Yeah, and there you just described the legacy that these kids were creating, it also as a promotional,
well,
ultimately as a promotional tool.
The other key thing for the destination, they were saying, we will use ICCA as an experiment because we know that so many of our events, people are using taxis, they can't be bothered to use the transport. We'll use this as a template to be able to persuade all of our future clients that they don't need to put their delegates in shuttle buses and taxis. Right. They can actually make this system work, even though when you have a centre outside the city centre, it's perceived as something which is a challenge. And they change the whole mentality in the way that all their clients use the city.
So, Marjan, Martin talked a lot about, collaboration and dialogue, and these kids were able to change public transport and hours of the things operating in order to create this legacy, effectively. So, from your point of view, how are you handling or rather, what are some of the challenges or difficulties that you're facing in thinking about your legacy program? Here we talked about all the positives and the easy side, maybe, and the opportunities that were seen. But I'm sure you face some hurdles as well.
I mean, one of the biggest challenges is to get a team of people who are so focused on delivering an event on a particular date, April 20, 2021, to even get them to think of the future of that future. So it took a lot of effort, and it's still a challenge. It takes a lot of effort and education and spending good time with the people that you work with and also stakeholders to tell them about the benefits of doing that. And it's very challenging to integrate that thinking in everyday processes. But I've been part of the team since 2014, and that's what I've been spending my time in. And today, any team, I'm very proud to say, when they think of their planning, they always think, okay, what about the legacy? Are we doing this for a short period of time, or do we think about maybe extending certain things to the future? So I would say that whole notion of planning for the future of the future is always going to be difficult. But it comes around the more you communicate with people, the more you create the right relationships and with time.
And of course, you've been given that brief right from day one. There had to be a future. There had to be something after Expo 2020. But for those of you that are with associations or you organise meetings, I'm sure the short-term focus on the meeting, it's going to last for 2, 3, 4 days, is something that resonated with you. How are you overcoming, or how are you approaching the opportunity to now think of the event itself and what you're going to leave behind? Again, any examples? Yes, please, thank you. Microphone's on the way. And if you could introduce yourself.
Yes, I'm Stephanie La Rochefoucauld. I'm the Executive Director of the International Brain Research Organization. And I want to combine this with Martin a little bit, legacy and the youth as opposed to the future. For the past maybe, I'd say 15 years, and we run a meeting on neuroscience. It's cutting edge. The speakers are top level in the world. The audience is postdoc to mid-career. And what we've done is go into the schools in the local continent and give out a high school level textbook on neuroscience. And the students study it. And then we hold what we call the International Brain Bee. It's like a spelling bee. And they answer questions, and the one who wins, and this again is loved by the press. We've been doing it, as I say, for 10 or 15 years, and we'll do it with every Congress we have. So that's how we've combined the two of them.
Brilliant.
Send your entry to Incredible Impacts. Next year, 2018.
Any other examples from the associations? Because again, this is not new. We've all been thinking about how to engage community, work with the younger generation. But are there any other stories like this on giving back to the community or helping to educate the community that you're in with your events?
I think, Nikki, the word story, while the hand's going up, the word story is really important. One of the biggest missing links is solid research methodologies for measuring many of these impacts. But what can be done in the absence of those studies is to tell good stories. And I know the International AIDS Society very famously put together, after one of their congresses, they put together a huge book where they went out to all of their delegates and said, just give us one short paragraph story of how going to this meeting transformed your ability to do your job, or enabled you to change minds or change attitudes, or enabled you to train others to make impacts. And they collected it together and had, I don't know, 1,000 different stories of how going to that Congress helped to make a difference. So it isn't always about a well-researched academic study of the impacts. It can also be just really good storytelling.
And I'm going to come back to the lady over there in just a second, but Martin, I wanted to ask you, because you were talking earlier on about measurement,
yeah.
and I think there are some tools or some suggestions that you have around measurement. How do we measure the legacy? How do we measure the impact?
There's currently an initiative being led by the UTS, the Technical University of Sydney, to try and find a dozen or so academically rigorous studies that are measuring things like networking effects, knowledge transfer, knowledge creation, inward investment. You know, do you use longitudinal studies? Do you use impact studies? Do you use interviews? Whatever it might be. By the end of this year, hopefully they'll have a dozen or so really good examples, and from that, what we're hoping is we'll be able to draw up some good advice on the methodologies to use when each of us is trying to measure these different elements that are historically very, very difficult to get your head around. So we don't have to keep reinventing the wheel. And this information is going to be shared through a meetings industry neutral platform, a not-for-profit called The Iceberg. It's the-iceberg.org. At the moment, it's a repository of both the stories and also where the research studies are also going to be highlighted. So it's open for any associations, for anybody in the meetings industry to share your own research studies, your own stories about impact, so that ultimately we can all learn from each other and get this across to people better to make the point of what, and this, it isn't just about association meetings, but I have a vested interest in association meetings, and I think that associations tell the best stories about the impact that goes beyond the pure delegate spend of their events.
Great. So storytelling is a very important aspect. So let's come back, having asked for some audience examples. I think we have some comment over here.
My name is Jennifer Fontanella. I'm the Director of Operations for an academic association, international, called the International Studies Association. And at our annual convention, we bring in local college students from wherever we happen to be hosting it, and not only do they volunteer for us, but we give back in terms of, we give them a membership, a student membership for us to the organization, and then we bring in advocacy groups from the local area, and we give them free exhibitor space so that they can interact with the people, and we'll put our members in touch with those groups so that they can do community events while they're there, even if it's just volunteering in local shelters, soup kitchens, that kind of thing.
Excellent. Yeah, I think for a number of years, I know a lot of associations have been looking at the city and what's been going on in the city that they've chosen to hold the meeting in, because we're generally booking our meetings, 2 to 3 years out. I was in New Orleans at an industry association meeting, just after the floods, and we were out. The community activity was repainting some of the park buildings that had been damaged. So and this I'm talking whatever it is now, 10 years ago. So this is not new territory, but I think there is much more focus within the industry now about the future, the beyond the physical, beyond the actual event restrictions. So, Marjan, let's come back to you. And do you, you're working in a very global field here with, Expo 2020. You've just got 150 countries that have signed up. In our globalized world, is that offering you greater opportunity to create this legacy and a fantastic sustainability to the project? Is it actually made easier by the ease of communications and being able to encourage such global participation? Is that helping the day-to-day?
Having the 150 countries?
Having the fact that it's so easy to communicate with all the countries and bring them in and engage them, because you're engaging them now for something that's going to take place in 3 years' time. You're having ongoing dialogue about also what their what ROI they're looking for, what are they trying to achieve, what are their sustainability goals?
I'll just start by saying it's not easy to get 150 countries on board. There's a lot of communication that needs to go in. It's very intense discussions around what value participation would bring to you. But having them on board is going to be part of this legacy that we're creating. As an organization, we're looking to attract, for example, the highest number of countries participating in an Expo. 186 is one of the highest numbers, so that will be a legacy in itself. But as I said earlier, we're looking to, beyond just their participation, seeing how we can create value for them here, being in Dubai, being in this region, and, having them to talk to each other and getting introduced to other players around the city. So it does, that's part of the legacy that we're creating. And of course, with these countries coming on board, it's a lot of what they offer to the visitors who are coming. So, sharing their knowledge on innovations and how they're addressing challenges we all commonly face.
Great. So, Martin, let's talk a little bit about the cities, the venues, the destinations. We've talked quite a lot about how associations are going about it. What common hurdles are you seeing or opportunities are you seeing in the cities that you were earlier saying they're changing their approach, they're starting to understand that this isn't just about selling an expo venue or a meeting site. Where do we need to still fine-tune and tweak that?
Yeah, I mean, I first heard about a city that was focused on intellectual capital, economic development back in about 2005. It became mainstream around about 2010, the destinations. Now, essentially, every leading destination has got intellectual capital, economic development, sustainability, looking after the interests of their population in their agenda, whether they're structured to deal with that or not. So they're open to having conversations with associations at a more elevated level. When you get into issues such as where are cities investing, they're investing in areas which are going to give them competitive advantage going forward. So they're building centres to attract the type of meetings that are going to attract people to come and live in those cities. I think the best city to watch at the moment is Sydney with their new International Convention Centre, who've been doing a huge amount of work projecting their legacy approach and their legacy philosophy. Everything from how they're supporting their local farmers in terms of their menu choices, through to how any destination can support Aboriginal culture and Aboriginal rights and Aboriginal education and empowerment by holding an event in Sydney. So they're putting it right at the heart of what they're doing. Possibly the coolest example I came across recently was the city of Antwerp, who've opened a new Flanders Convention Centre, and it's a centre that's actually built in the city's old zoo. And they've just won our Best Marketing Award. They've won a couple of other major awards because the entire thinking behind why the city built that establishment was that the extra profit that was going to be generated from this new facility is entirely going into animal husbandry, education about the environment, etc. So they built the legacy and the positioning of this entirely around legacy issues. It wasn't about profitability, but they know as a side effect they'll get the right type of association wanting to be established, wanting to be linked with that, wanting to bring their meetings there, and therefore they'll both generate more money and generate more people staying in the hotels and supporting the local jobs. They estimated that previously their meetings activity was generating, I think, 100,000 surplus on operations, which went back into conservation programs. Right. With this, they were talking about a 5 million euro increase in turnover and €1 million going towards these programs. In fact, they were so successful in the launch, they're getting double the number of events coming through. And I haven't seen the figures on what it means, but I'm guessing it's probably going to be 1.5 million that is going to go into a very, very worthy cause. Now, by putting it right at the heart of the whole marketing effort and the whole rationale for it, they're positioning, they're differentiating themselves from other cities in the marketplace, because Antwerp is one of 100 beautiful historic cities in Europe. And so more and more, we're going to see that cities are going to have to do this.
At the core. And Marjan, Marjan has given us a couple of best practices seen from a city point of view. Do you benchmark what you're trying to achieve with Expo 2020 against, previous expos? Is there a particular event that's been you know, aspirational and inspirational to you in trying to set the standard for Expo 2020?
Learning from past experiences at the cornerstone of our work. So we spend a lot of time speaking to other industry experts, and particularly in the mega event world. We've looked at every mega event out there, and we focused a lot on previous World Expos, which have a very rich history in the countries that they've been hosted in. But one that stands out is the first World Expo that took place in England in 1851. And we really use that as the benchmark of all benchmarks, because the outcome of the vision of Prince Albert, who was tasked to set out this World Expo, is what we know in all the institutions we see in South Kensington today. And that was a learning experience for the team that were looking into this. You know, the V&A Museum, the Imperial College. I mean, what rich legacy was left behind? And that was all part of a broader vision that Prince Albert had for the World Expo, that it continues into the city, that will continue having skilled people and you know, having a rich culture. So that's the ultimate benchmark. We're not saying that we're going to be like 1851, but there's so much learnings there. And then there have been a lot of people that we've spoken to in the mega, in the World Expo world. A lot of them work with us in the organization. And you know, even I've attended a lot of association meetings recently, and there's so much to learn from a lot of the initiatives that are being implemented through them. So I think we're going to continue learning.
Cool. Fantastic. And Martin, what about you? Do you have a particular, you know, is there like a wonderful event that is your real sort of point of reference when we talk about creating legacy?
Not so much for legacy. I mean, I was smiling because Marjan just came to speak at our Congress in Prague just a few weeks ago. And one of the reasons for that was to try and already reset our delegates' mentality about what Dubai actually stands for. One of the big strategic shifts that this city is trying to achieve is to change the notion that it's purely about 5- and 6- and 7-star luxury establishments, and actually talk about what it means for ordinary people and what it's trying to do to set an example of communication and openness between different cultures. I mean, this is a hugely planned, hugely inspirational place. So that already was a great start. For me, I mentally have my favorite Congress of all time as a delegate, because I take very great care not to have a favorite as an organizer. That would lose me my job very fast. But as a delegate, I attended my second ICCA Congress in Adelaide, in Australia in 1990. And I can still remember the images from that of what they were trying to project to us about what this Congress meant for Australia. This was when the country was going through the very first round of investment to position itself as an international meetings destination. And from the very outset, they were positioning themselves in terms of knowledge exchange, science, medical. They were not pushing a tourism. The more I think about it, the more I realize they were not pushing a tourism agenda. They were pushing an agenda about culture, about science, about advancement, about education. And everything, and the whole, everything I remember from that event was linked into those kind of themes. They weren't purely about just doing business, and they certainly weren't just about having a tourism experience. They were about deep knowledge and about sharing and about culture and understanding what it meant to be, you know, what Australia stood for.
Great. So let me ask the room again if there is any other associations that can share a best practice or a worst experience, for example, trying to you know, create some kind of pre or post actual core meeting experience within the community, within the place you're working, some of the achievements that you have managed to orchestrate with your association. Is there anyone else that would like to share a last best practice? Or yes, thank you.
Mike.
Or a question, okay. Microphone's there.
So it's sort of like a reverse question, and I'm looking for a creative answer for how are we as young branches of associations with legacy, how can we bring the legacy of associations that we represent that were founded. I heard some that were over 100 years. Ours is over 70 years. How can we transfer the legacy of our association into the young branches of those associations in Dubai? I know it's a bit off topic, but if you can have a creative answer, I would appreciate it.
Well, I think what you're also asking is, you know, if an association's been around for a long time, it's had a long time to try and create and work out legacy, whereas, you know, a young association or one that's not been established for too long, how...
No, I wasn't talking about the younger, I'm talking about the associations that are member of DAC that have only been here for a few years.
Yeah.
How can we capture the legacy of our mother associations and capture it and transfer it or bring it out in our work here in Dubai?
Yeah, and I think, you know, you've heard a number of examples, but I think also you're sort of like, how do you learn from those that have done it before? And you know, a lot of the associations under DAC are relatively young and new. So let me put that to Marjan a little bit, because the reason why I'm doing that, Marjan, is, you know, you're creating something from scratch.
Yes.
And you have a timeline, and then it's going to stop. So in a way, you're bringing all those best practices from those that have done it before and really looking at how you do that in, okay, it's a relatively short period of time, you know, 6 years. So how would you recommend that, you know, a startup is really focusing on creating legacy? You're a startup.
Yeah, that's... I'm not sure I understood your question very right, but I'll just say some things and maybe it will hit a note. So I believe any organization needs to think about positive impact. Let's not call it legacy, but it should be part of your planning. And if I'll go back to the Expo example, which is a startup, strangely enough, and we've been thinking a lot about how are we going to collect all this information we've been gaining over these years of planning. So right now we're in a discussion point of how are we going to archive our best practices. So when the time comes for us to share, you know, how do we dig it up, and how is it that we're going to teach, not teach, but share different experiences we had across the industries. So, I mean, I think from a planning perspective, you need to integrate that in anything that you're doing, because that's what we're doing. And if it's a natural part of the business, then it will come easily. But if it's not something that's there, then it will take more time to set up. I'm not sure if that brings.
I'd reinforce that. I mean, the two elements I'd say. One is that an international organization which has set up a branch in DAC, in DAC, in order to reach, they've done it for a reason that serves their organization's mission, whether that's standards or education or membership growth or empowerment or whatever it might be. So you've got a huge reservoir of support for the work you're doing if you can tap into it. The second thing is that any organization, ultimately an association is only as strong as the passion of its members. You know, ultimately we're community-based organizations, and that's what sets us apart from companies, which, as you may have noticed, are trying to become more like communities. So any legacy building or impact building that you're trying to achieve has to be in alignment with what is it that drives your membership. And if you understand that, then you can create any type of program at all, from small scale to large scale, because the members themselves and your staff will all get behind it. We find whenever we put something forward which aligns with what our members believe in, then we have no problem. If we try and introduce a program that doesn't really resonate properly and doesn't capture the spirit of the association, it's always going to be a hard sell. And we deliberately try to make sure that the programs we put together have been thought through so they match up with our culture and our what the members are trying to achieve.
Excellent. I mean, thank you, Martin. Well, we're out of time, I'm afraid, so we could all talk about this, I think, forever, but there'll be plenty more opportunities also in tonight's dinner. So please join me and thank Martin and Marjan for their insights.